The sound of heavy machinery woke me that morning. I stepped onto the balcony of my small apartment, coffee in hand, and felt my heart stop. In the distance, a line of construction vehicles snaked their way up the hill toward Everwood Manor, my family's ancestral home. Or rather, what used to be our family home. I'm Catherine Everwood, 32, local history professor, and last of the Everwood line. Though according to my parents, that legacy died the day they sold our 200-year-old estate to Highland Development Corporation. It's for the best, Cat, Mom had said last month over dinner. The place is falling apart. The taxes alone. We signed the papers this morning, Dad added, not meeting my eyes. They're planning luxury condos. Very exclusive. I'd sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, as they explained how they'd sold my inheritance, our family's heritage, without even telling me. The home where 6 generations of Everwoods had lived. Where I'd grown up exploring secret passages and reading in window seats. Where Grandfather had spent his final years teaching me about our family's history. The home that, according to Grandfather's last words to me, held secrets they'd never understood. Now I watched the bulldozers approach, their yellow paint bright against the morning mist. My phone buzzed. Mom, probably calling to remind me not to make a scene when the demolition started. I let it go to voicemail. Instead, I pulled out the key I always wore around my neck, the one Grandfather had given me on his deathbed 3 years ago, pressing it into my palm with trembling fingers. The true legacy, he'd whispered. In my study, behind the portrait, they never knew. He died before finishing the sentence. I tried to find what he meant, but Mom and Dad had quickly packed up his study, claiming they needed to clear the clutter. They donated his books, sold his antiques, stripped the room bare before I could properly search. But they hadn't found the key. And now, watching those bulldozers, I realized this might be my last chance to discover what Grandfather had tried to tell me. I called in sick to the university where I taught, grabbed my messenger bag, and headed for my car. The drive to Everwood Manor took 15 minutes, the same route I'd walked to school as a child, past the old church, around Potter's Pond, up the winding hill. The estate looked different now. The gardens were overgrown, the fountain dry. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, sporting No Terias Basng signs and Highland Development's logo. But I knew ways in that weren't on any blueprint. Behind the carriage house, hidden by decades of ivy growth, was a small door, a servant's entrance from the old days. The key around my neck wouldn't open it. I tried after Grandfather's death, but the loose board I discovered at age 12 still moved aside. I slipped through the gap, brushing cobwebs from my hair. The estate grounds were eerily quiet despite the construction vehicles gathering at the front gate. They were probably waiting for the project manager, giving me precious minutes. The manor's back door was locked, but the kitchen window had never latched properly. Inside, the house smelled of dust and abandonment. Sheets covered the furniture, pale ghosts in the dim light. My footsteps echoed on hardwood floors that had once held elegant parties, family gatherings, holiday celebrations. Grandfather's study was on the second floor, overlooking the rose garden. I made my way there quickly, aware that time was running out. The room was exactly as I remember from my last visit, empty bookcases lining the walls, bare desk by the window, and above the fireplace, the only thing my parents hadn't removed, the massive portrait of my great-great-grandfather, Theodore Everwood. The painting had hung there for over a century. Mom always complained about it, saying it was creepy how Theodore's eyes seemed to follow you around the room. But Grandfather would just smile and say, "Old Theodore's keeping watch." Now I stood before the portrait, heart pounding. Behind the portrait, Grandfather had said. But the painting was huge, far too heavy for me to move alone. Unless. I ran my fingers along the ornate frame, remembering Grandfather's lessons about the house. Nothing here is quite what it seems, Cat. The builders had their secrets. There, a small irregularity in the carving. I pressed it and heard a click. The portrait swung away from the wall like a door, revealing a small wall safe. My hands shook as I lifted the key from around my neck. It fit perfectly. Inside the safe was a single leather portfolio thick with age. The cover bore our family crest and a date, 1823. Voices drifted up from outside. Construction workers, getting closer. I shoved the portfolio into my messenger bag just as heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. Check all the rooms, a man's voice called. Make sure no squatters before we start demolition. I eased the portrait closed and looked around frantically. The window? Too high. The closet. First place they check. The footsteps reached the hallway. Then I remembered. The priest's hole. Every old manor had one, a hiding place for Catholic clergy during persecution. Grandfather had shown me ours behind a false panel in the bookcase. I found the hidden latch just as the study door opened. Two men in hard hats entered, carrying clipboards. Through a tiny gap in the panel, I watched them survey the room. Shame to tear it all down, the younger one said. Place has character. Place has dry rot and asbestos, his companion replied. Besides, the deal's done. Owners signed everything over, no conditions. What about those rumors? Historical Society making noise about preservation. Nothing to preserve. We checked records. House was heavily modified in the 1950s. No historical value. I bit back a laugh. If they only knew what I now held in my bag. They left eventually, closing the door behind them. I waited 10 minutes before emerging, legs cramped from the small space. Outside, the construction noise was getting louder. Time to go. I retraced my steps through the house, pausing at the foot of the main staircase. The family portrait still hung there, all 6 generations of Everwoods, leading down to me. My parents had already removed it from their new condo, saying it didn't match the decor. More voices outside. I ducked through the kitchen window and made my escape through the ivy-covered door. In my car, safely parked down the hill, I finally opened the portfolio. The first page made my breath catch. The True Deed and Historical Registry of Everwood Manor, as recorded by Theodore Everwood, 1823. Below was an official seal I recognized from my research, the Royal Historical Society. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. Property maps, construction records, letters from historical figures, documents that proved Everwood Manor wasn't just some old house. It was one of the earliest examples of colonial American architecture, a stopping point on the Underground Railroad, a treasure trove of historical significance, and my parents had sold it to developers for a fraction of its true value. My phone buzzed again, Mom's third attempt to reach me. This time I answered. Catherine, are you watching the news? They're starting demolition today. Please don't make a fuss. Actually, Mom, I said calmly. I think the developers might have to delay their plans. I found something they need to see. What are you talking about? Grandfather's legacy, the real one. The one you and Dad were too busy selling antiques to find. Catherine, don't you dare interfere. The deal is done. I watched another truck turn up the hill toward the manor. We'll see about that, I said, and hung up. Time to make some calls of my own, starting with the Historical Society, then the Preservation Board, and finally. Well, Highland Development was about to learn that some legacies can't be bought and sold. And my parents? They were about to discover that the daughter they dismissed knew more about preserving family history than they'd ever imagined. The Historical Society's offices hadn't changed since my graduate school days. Same cramped rooms, same towering shelves of documents, same scent of old paper and coffee. Catherine Everwood. Dr. Eleanor Barnes looked up from her desk, smile fading as she saw my expression. What's wrong? I placed Theodore's portfolio on her desk. I need your help saving my family's home. 2 hours later, Eleanor sat back, adjusting her reading glasses. She'd examined every document, cross-referenced dates, verified seals. This is extraordinary, she breathed. The architectural details alone. And these Underground Railroad records. Catherine, this isn't just your family's history. This is American history. Can you help stop the demolition? She was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling Judge Matthews. He heads the Preservation Board. With evidence like this, we can get an emergency injunction. I glanced at my watch. The demolition crews will be starting soon. How long? If we move fast, 2 hours, maybe less. I stood up. I'll head back to the manor. Stall them as long as I can. Catherine. Eleanor called as I reached the door. Your grandfather, he was right all along. For years, he tried to get the Historical Society interested in Everwood Manor, but without these documents, my throat tightened. I know, my parents thought he was just being sentimental. Well, she smiled, lifting the phone, let's prove them wrong. The scene at Everwood Manor had transformed. Construction crews swarmed the grounds. A massive wrecking ball hung suspended over the east wing, where the oldest part of the house stood. I parked at the gate, flashing my driver's license to the security guard. "I'm Catherine Everwood. The property owners are my parents." He checked his list. "Sorry, ma'am. Only authorized personnel today." "Then you should call Mr. Davidson." I named Highland Development's CEO. "Tell him Catherine Everwood has some interesting documents about this property's historical status, and about certain tax implications he might want to consider." 5 minutes later, I was escorted to a makeshift office in the carriage house. Robert Davidson looked exactly like his corporate headshots. Expensive suit, artificial tan, practiced smile. "Miss Everwood, your parents mentioned you might be concerned about our project." "Concerned?" I laid Theodore's portfolio on his desk. "No, Mr. Davidson. I'm here to save you from making a very expensive mistake." His smile slipped as he read. With each page, his face grew paler. "This can't be verified," he said finally. "The sale is complete. Your parents didn't know about these documents, but the Historical Society does now. Their lawyers are preparing an injunction as we speak." He reached for his phone. "Our legal team should probably review Section 47 of the State Historical Preservation Code." I interrupted, "specifically the parts about criminal penalties for destroying registered historical sites, and the provisions about corporate officer liability." That hit home. Davidson built his reputation on luxury developments. Being labeled a destroyer of historical treasures would ruin him. "What do you want?" "Simple. Highland Development withdraws from the purchase, citing unexpected complications. The property returns to my family's ownership. Your parents signed a contract. A contract based on incomplete information about the property's true value and historical status. Would you like to explain to your shareholders why you didn't perform proper due diligence?" He studied me for a long moment. "You're not what I expected. Your parents described you as impractical, a dreamer. They don't know me as well as they think." 3 hours later, I stood in grandfather's study watching the construction vehicles retreat down the hill. Eleanor had come through. The emergency injunction was granted. Davidson, seeing which way the wind was blowing, had been surprisingly reasonable about voiding the sale. My phone buzzed. "Mom again. What have you done?" she demanded without preamble. "Mr. Davidson just called. Do you know how much money we've lost?" Actually, I kept my voice calm. "I've just increased the property's value significantly. Historical status means grants for restoration, tax benefits, tourism revenue." "Tourism? You want to turn our home into some kind of museum?" "It already is a museum, Mom. Every brick, every beam tells a story. Stories grandfather tried to tell you, if he'd listened. Your grandfather was a foolish old man, who protected our legacy while you and Dad tried to sell it off piece by piece." My voice hardened. "The manor isn't yours to sell anymore. The Historical Society is helping me establish a trust. The house will be preserved, restored, and yes, shared with people who actually appreciate its significance." Silence. "Then, you can't do this." "I already have. Check your email. You'll find documents from our lawyers outlining the transfer of ownership. Sign them." "Or what?" "Or I let the Historical Society investigate how many artifacts you sold without proper documentation. Those antiques you cleared out of grandfather's study. Some were historically protected items." More silence. "You don't understand what this house has cost us," she said finally. "The maintenance, the taxes." "No, Mom, you never understood what this house gave us. But you will." 1 year later, I stood in Everwood Manor's restored Great Hall, watching tourists marvel at the architectural details. The restoration had been challenging but rewarding. Each room now told its story, from the colonial period to the Civil War to the present. Grandfather's study remained my favorite spot. The manor's grounds had been transformed too. The gardens bloomed again. The fountain flowed. And every weekend, local families picnicked on the lawns while their children played on the carefully preserved grounds. My parents hadn't visited. Pride, probably, or shame. But last week, Mom had sent a package, grandfather's old photo albums, rescued from their storage unit. "These belong in the manor," her note read, "with its keeper. Small steps. I was reviewing tour schedules in grandfather's study when Eleanor Barnes arrived for her weekly visit. The grant committee approved your education program proposal, she'd announced. Full funding for school tours and historical reenactments. I smiled, remembering grandfather's stories about Civil War soldiers hiding in the priest's hole, escaped slaves sheltering in the cellar. Think they'd like to hear about the secret passages? Save something for the advanced tours, she laughed. Speaking of which, that historian from the Smithsonian is visiting next week. The one researching Underground Railroad sites? I nodded, touching the key I still wore around my neck. I think it's time to show him what else Theodore's papers reveal. Because that's the thing about old houses, they never run out of secrets. Every restoration reveals new mysteries. Every document leads to more discoveries. That call yesterday, first time since the injunction. The house, he said awkwardly. It looks good. In the newspaper photos. You should visit, I replied. There's a new exhibit about the families who lived here, including us. Maybe, he said, someday. It's a start. Meanwhile, Everwood Manor endures. Not as luxury condos or a demolished memory, but as a living piece of history. Every day, visitors learned stories about architecture and war, courage and freedom, family and legacy. And sometimes late at night when the tours are done, I sit in grandfather's study and imagine him smiling. Well done, Kat, he'd say. You found the true legacy. And I did. Not in property values or sale contracts, but in the stories these walls hold. The history they witnessed. The lives they touched. Some things can't be bought or sold. Some legacies must be preserved. Some houses are more than just buildings. They're keepers of memories, guardians of truth, bridges between past and future. That's what grandfather understood. What my parents forgot. And what I'll spend the rest of my life protecting. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about keeping faith. With history, with heritage. With the whispered wisdom of generations. And with a grandfather who trusted his dreamer of a granddaughter to understand what really matters. In the end, that's the greatest legacy of all.